Good afternoon. Hope you're all feeling good. It's Monday afternoon, so it is a good time for it. But we're going to be talking today about roots of resilience and how we think businesses can really kind of create resilience moving forward, particularly with everything that's going on. So a couple of housekeeping bits to start with. Our recording session is currently recording, so you'll be sent the recording and the slides afterwards, so you don't need to worry too much about notes, things like that. We'll also send you a little download at the end as well that you can have going forward. So kind of feel free throughout to post in the chat what your name is, what your role is, where you're calling from. If you've got any kind of bits to discuss throughout, feel free to pop them in the chat. But if there's any kind of questions specifically, we will be having Q&A at the end. So please do put them in the Q&A function on Zoom, and we'll be able to pick them up as we go through. Bro, so I'll hand over to Emma to get started.
Thanks, Fern, and hi everyone. I'm Emma. I'm the lead planetary health consultant here at Green Heart. And today I'll be joined again by Fern and also by Bianca, who make up the Planetary Health Circle with me. And they'll be bringing their wealth of knowledge to this session as well. So for those of you that don't know very much about Green Heart, we are a sustainability consultancy, primarily focused on supporting businesses with their B Corp journeys. But as well as that, we offer a range of sustainability services, including environmental management, carbon and net zero, ESG compliance and reporting, sustainability strategy, materiality, and all sorts of other things as well. You will see a lot of references to nature in what we do, and that's because we're passionate about nature and we take nature as our guide in everything we do and believe that realigning with nature's principles is how we will achieve the path to a truly sustainable future. So what we will be covering today, we will touch on why it's important to get the good foundations in place now, and then we'll go through each foundational focus area and bring in examples throughout. And then, as Fern said, we'll end with a Q&A session. So why are we here today, and why is this so critical to be talking about now? I think it's fair to say, and it's no understatement, that we are navigating very tricky times. And since COVID, it feels like huge world events are hitting us nonstop in waves. We're all in a challenging environment, facing an uncertain future, which is not good for market confidence, difficult for operating environment for businesses, and therefore there's pressure on budgets and pressure on sustainability budgets, which are being questioned as well. Budgets might be being cut, but expectations and requirements aren't. This is, however, the absolute worst time to stall on progress, of course, because climate change, as we all know, is real and happening now. It's impacting our supply chains. In fact, 80% of businesses predict that they're going to have a supply chain incident caused by climate change affecting them in this coming year. And also, at the same time, ESG legislation is increasing. And in fact, ESG laws surged by 155% in just the last 5 years. So finding your way through all of this can be like being in a maze. It's complicated and confusing, and we're there with you. We understand, we feel your pain. This can be overlapping, in some cases contradicting each other. There have been U-turns lately, and this is all making it more and more difficult for those trying to navigate. And what it results in is this kind of reactive firefighting position. And also this leads to lack of meaningful progress. But we know that we support all of you, and we know that you're really trying your best. So the need for this webinar became clear. And this is because we want to help you make it cheaper, more effective, less overwhelming, and give you time to take a step back, get the basic foundations right. And that's what we aim to go through with you today. So, of course, with the tree analogy, because it works so well, here are some basic steps or foundations that if you take the time to get right, will really put you in a great position. Because these processes will be fully embedded in your organization. It'll just become part of what you do. Of course, this seems quite simple. We understand it's complex for more complex organizations, but we work with many of them too and have found this still applies. And it's important to note that everything in terms of B Corp, V7, best practice frameworks, reporting standards, everything is heading in the same direction. And a lot of these requirements will stand you in really, really good stead, whatever comes your way. So we have mycelium networks, which we're going to start with, and then we'll work with our way through one by one. So here we go with the foundational elements, mycelium networks. This area is all about having a strong understanding of your business in the context, so you can effectively prioritize and have excellent supporting functions. You just really need to understand your business. And this is, we've really well, a really good example is mycelium networks, because they're what's going on underground and they're absolutely critical. They're this wonderful network of fungi that carries out essential functions. They carry water, nitrogen, other minerals. And that's how trees communicate with each other even, which is known also as the Wood Wide Web. Well, no, it's not actually, but I was just checking if anyone was still with us. So this is our essential first step to absolutely underpin everything. And that's why I wanted to make sure everyone was listening, because it's absolutely crucial to everything we do. And now we'll go on to the 4 elements in a little bit more detail. So first of all, we have value chain mapping. And this is something that we start and we prioritize with all of our businesses that we work with. And it's a case of laying out all of the inputs, all of the activities, all of the outputs, all of your direct activities, what you control, your own footprint, and what you indirectly control through your influence. And then we map on top of it all of the planetary interactions, the planetary boundaries that you're operating within, and your social interactions and social foundations as well. This is really, really helpful, and we just tend to build and build and build on them. We can add manufacturers, we can add logistics, we can add so much to it. And if you do it right, it solves multiple purposes for multiple different things. And it's actually really handy as well for communication, both internally to show everybody what you're doing, and also externally. So then we come on to stakeholder mapping. And this is about who cares and why. It's really going to be important in some of your later steps. So again, it's important to get right. So you need to find out who are your stakeholders, what are their needs, how are their needs changing, how do you need to engage with them, and why. Again, because of all of these requirements that are coming up now, this is something that you're going to need to provide evidence for to show that you've done it. And the reason is because it's really helpful and it really underpins a good strategy. So taking the time to do this will give you the evidence needed and also make sure that you're really understanding the context at which you're operating in on a global scale. So you can carry out, to get the foundational basic understanding and a really thorough understanding, you can carry out a basic environmental social assessment. However, now the focus is really shifting towards what we call materiality assessment. And I'd now like to invite Fern to come back and join us to explain why materiality is such a hot topic at the moment and how to do it well. Fern, can you please give us the rundown on what makes a good materiality process?
Thanks, Emma. I've got quite a long list here, but we've narrowed it down into some kind of key points to pitch in on. Basically, like you've already said, Emma, a materiality assessment can be really valuable to help you understand all of the issues that touch your business. So this can be both from the perspective of your business's impact on the outside world, and we often refer that to impact materiality, but also could be the impact of the outside world on your business. So things that will impact your business function, profitability, revenue, and that's often referred to as financial materiality. So to start off with, it's really helpful to map out all of these issues and help you understand them in more detail. And it's no coincidence that there's so many different legislations and standards out there that require double materiality now. So we'll double or single materiality. Single is just when you either refer to financial materiality or impact materiality, and double is both joined together. So things like the US CSRD, the new B Corp standards, Global Resource Institute standards, SASB, IFRS, so many of them. And they're all in response to the fact that sustainability in businesses can't just be piecemeal anymore. Like, you can't just focus on, for example, carbon or some social area that you really want to focus on. It's about looking at the whole business and saying, these are all the things that touch us. These are all the important things, and this is why they're important. And it helps you identify kind of both the positives and the negatives, so it can be both sides of the coin, and it can help you understand the significance of these between each other. So it can really help you to look at the hotspots and prioritize which ones you should focus on first and which ones you must focus on first. And it's really kind of helpful as well, because it means that you can kind of back up your sustainability strategies with this kind of data-driven piece of work as well. And often it can kind of link to, I love it because it can link to all different areas of your business. So for example, you should really be linking it to, for example, your risk registers and making sure everything speaks to each other. Your strategy, for example, should feed in from that. So it's really kind of a way of doing things a bit differently to how we have in the past.
It sounds like materiality will really help us achieve more focused action. So as an expert in this area, can you give any top tips to completing a really good materiality?
I can. First one I'd say is making sure you cover multiple different perspectives and not just your own, or not just what you want the assessment to show. And we kind of see that often, and we've seen that in the past, but there's much more scrutiny on what companies communicate on it now. And the fact that actually people are saying, we want to see all the kind of downsides, we want to see more transparency in your issues. So creating kind of that true picture of impacts, risks and responsibilities is really what the whole purpose of it is. So definitely focus on that, and don't just paint a picture based on what you want people to see, because it will be quite easy for others to see through it as well. And then it's not useful to your business because it's not realistic. Kind of another one is using it to inform your strategy. So like I said before, it can really help you to prioritize which elements you should focus on, because like with most things in sustainability, you can't focus on everything at once. And so it really helps you to kind of say, we're going to do this first because this is the most material, and then we'll look at this later on. So it's about saying kind of, we need to do work on all of this, but we're going to focus on these first because these are the most material to us. And kind of the last thing is basically just being clear on what you want to get out of the materiality, and who you want to kind of communicate that message to. So if it's shareholders, if it's to your board, if it's to your internal teams, or whether it's to, for example, your customers. So just thinking about what sort of outputs you will need to show. So what sort of graphics and methodology and how much detail you need to provide others with is really helpful going through the process.
Amazing. That was really useful. Thanks, Fern.
No worries, back to you.
Okay, so other key foundational elements, and this is one that's really important, is having good governance and structures in place, coupled with effective communications. Once you've got that really sound basis of understanding of where you are and where you are working from, you really need to think about where you want to be. And it can involve a bit of crystal ball gazing, because you have to think about what the world is going to look like in the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years. But try and look at these elements as if you were looking for a match on a dating website. These will be your absolute non-negotiables. And you really need to question yourself, do you have these in place at the moment? Because you might have the most amazing plans, projects, ideas. But what we have seen with working with our clients, if these aren't in place properly and done really carefully at the beginning, then it can really hinder projects gaining traction and lead to slow progress and not as much progress as you want to make. And as we talked about with pressure on budgets, now more than ever, of course, leadership buy-in is absolutely crucial. And so this is a step that you really need to get right in terms of creating the business case to make sure that this is not something that just can be kind of moved off the list of priorities, because it's really important to lay out the kind of return of investment and how important it is to act now, because specifically, for example, in relation to climate action, the cost of actually dealing with problems later down the line are going to be so much more expensive than spending like 1% of turnover now, which is what it realistically costs to mitigate those actions now. For example, helping the business case and the business case helping will, making sure that this is all in place. You'll need clarity of purpose and how it links to overall business goals, and clarity over who's doing what. Just some little hints from our perspective of what we've seen going well and not so well. If this isn't in place, what can happen is you can have individual projects that are not joined up, people not talking to each other in different parts of the business, which leads to duplication. And as I've said, it can be slow to action projects. When roles and responsibilities are unclear, if they're not in job descriptions and there's no process, all information tends to be in somebody's head. If they leave or somebody's on holiday, for example, it creates a problem. It's also often the case that a lot of responsibility is on just a few individuals, and this can lead to a huge amount of pressure, which again stifles innovation and stifles the progress of those individuals. And if you don't get the two communication and feedback loops right, then you can have frustration throughout the business that people are not being heard and lessons are not being learnt. Done well, you have motivated and supported people, adequate resources, it's all integrated in job descriptions, you have strong communications, people are involved, and so you can gain buy-in, and leaders are demonstrating commitment through action. All sounds wonderful, doesn't it? But really, this is so much more effective, so much more efficient, it gets things done and motivates people to be involved. So again, as I said at the start, it would be good to just take a little bit of time to question how you're doing on each of these steps, because it would be really, really good time spent at the moment to get these right. So now we move on to the roots, which builds on the mycelium networks by adding more rigor. And this is where you get the chance to demonstrate action on your material areas that you've identified. And you need the evidence to prove what you're doing. And also you have this really important information to make sure you can make your decisions about where to act based on the information that you've gathered. So evidence and supporting systems. Here we move on to what I'm sure is everybody's favorite subject, especially at the moment, and one that, in our opinion, is taking up far too much time and causing counterproductive stress. In fact, I just received a message from one of our clients saying, yes, I'd love to speak to you, but come back to me in June, because I'm just going into a reporting period. And I've known of teams going underground for 3 months of the year. So clearly we need to prioritize action over reporting. And in many cases, it's a subject that's avoided until absolutely necessary. So would you go back to the previous slide, Fern? Thank you. So we're making the case for data to be taken from dreaded task to having the most important information at your fingertips exactly when you need it. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? But then you can demonstrate performance and use the data proactively rather than reactively. It can be easy to just go out and keep collecting more data, but what we're talking about here is streamlining data and not having it in lots of different places. And as I'm sure a lot of you can appreciate, getting this right might just change your life, and it will set you up for whatever is to come. What we find, though, is that what we think is the most important element on this chart is the last element, which is analysis and interpretation. But if we're really honest, this is one that our clients don't really do, if I'm completely honest, unless we force them to. And this is the area which is our favorite area, and which is where we want to be, and it's where we want to spend our time, because this is where we know the treasure and the gold is. But what happens is all of the time gets taken on the first three. So to be most efficient and most effective, what you want to do is make the first three as streamlined as possible, so you can take your time to focus on the last step, which is the most important. This may not be easy, but in time it will become much more smoother, because it will be as essential as gathering financial data, but you'll put yourself in a really good place for getting this right now. And then you'll avoid this never-ending horror film scenario where everybody is dreading the first 3 months of the year or even longer. So what I would encourage you to do if you make one commitment is, if you're involved in reporting in your organization, just start planning out next year now. Start thinking about what you can do to make it much easier going forwards from now, and don't leave it till the end of the year. So talking about data in a bit more detail, we need to do some data mapping and collection. Sounds like a really exciting thing to do, I know, but it's really, really important. You have many standards such as B Corp, and you have legal compliance requirements like SECR, Streamlined Energy Carbon Reporting, SBTI, all of the acronyms, and a lot of them have overlapping requirements. So you're collecting the same data points, but for multiple uses. So data mapping is really important. Finding out all the overlaps, what you have, what you don't have, where are the gaps, who needs what, where does everything sit, what's needed now, what might be needed in the future. You'll have internal data, which you might want to use for identifying efficiencies, for example, and compliance. You'll have external data where you will need to demonstrate, again, compliance, but also performance. And one thing I would really, as well, top tip, recommend that you do at this stage is look at the accuracy of your data. For example, one client told me last week that they were preparing their data for the extended producer responsibility requirements and the packaging regulations. And they have halved their packaging tonnage when they looked into the data because they were double counting. And this has saved them hundreds and thousands of pounds. So focus here will really, really provide benefits. So you need to establish how the data is being collected to avoid duplication and assign data owners. We love data owners, and we want data to pass through as few hands as possible because that will be the most efficient way of doing it. We want to identify who and where it will be collected, and we want you to document, or we would advise you to document the process, because that means that it stays within the business and it's not just resting with individuals, and it's all really, really clear, and you can create a process that lasts for the whole year and it's not just a kind of last minute panic at the end. And ideally set up automation. So now we can move on to data management systems, because when you've collected all of that data, you need to do something with it. And there are lots of different data management systems. Some of them might be in-house spreadsheets that you have already. You may have more than one. And you might have environmental management system in place. You might have risk management systems, carbon accounting systems. An environmental management system can be really useful as a data gathering hub. B Corp really like it. And it can house other compliance data such as ESOS, SECR, packaging data, carbon data, all in one place. But also, again, what you want to do is avoid the duplication. So what we often do is we can help our clients, and we go in and we smooth out the systems, provide clarity, and make sure everything is working well. Also, because you might be collecting supplier data, product stewardship data, you might have supplier systems in place. And we help our clients mapping out this need, looking at what they're currently doing, helping them build a solution, engaging with software providers. There's so many out there now. And what we would suggest you do is, using the previous steps, really clearly outline what you need if you're going out for looking for a software, because by layering all of these systems on top, you'll probably identify a need for a more of an integrated solution. But you need to clearly communicate what you need to get out of the system. That's if you're building a system in-house or if you're going externally. There's lots of systems coming on the market, as we've said. Some are good, some are not so good. Some of them are promising the world, especially we've talked about leveraging technology with things like AI. But you have to be a little bit careful what you get into in some cases, because some of them are quite limited and only allow you to go so far, because they've kind of developed this system and they haven't really thought through where things are going to need to evolve going forward. So before you lay out a big amount of money, it's really good to see how the system is going to change as you need to change what you're doing going forwards, and beware of false claims, which might limit your options. But ideally, we go towards this integrated system supported by technology. And so now for the next part, I'd just like to bring in Bianca, because she's our data whiz who is really good at analysing data, and she's just going to talk through some of the benefits of analysis and interpretation of data.
Thank you, Emma. Yes, so we've been talking about collecting all of this data, and if you have all of this data under one kind of magic system, it is always very handy, but what's actually more important is kind of what you do with the data and how you use that to kind of support your strategy and things like that. So a very quick and easy example is shown a little graph as an example. This might scare people a lot, for example, if they see this in their footprint, that their emissions have suddenly doubled from 2023 to 2024. But with the magic of data, you can actually see that if you normalize the data, I've used some dummy data and normalized FTE, but this could be in the sense of revenue as well. You could actually see a decrease in your emissions based on a normalized figure. And obviously what we do know is that in general, based on how much your company may make or how many FTEs there are, this can drastically drastically increase your emissions. So I think when you're doing analysis, you should always look to investigate why something has happened. It's all good having a number, but not knowing exactly why, firstly, can't help you fix a problem, but also just makes you feel, I guess, lost in the data and maybe a bit discouraged. Another example of this is that if you start collecting monthly data, which I find very helpful, is that, again, in this sense, I've shown an example of electricity consumption over a year. If you have a look at the graph, what you need to always think of is, what is it telling you? What picture is it painting? And how can I use that to craft a story of what has happened in the year? So in this example, it could be that in June, you have switched all your LED lights. You now use HVAC electricity. You've put in a lot of energy efficiency measures. So that has helped reduce your electricity consumption. So with all this magical data that you have, what is it actually telling you, and what kind of analysis can you actually do to not only show your progress, but also kind of back up that these efficiency measures are actually doing what you have promised that they will do?
What are some of the opportunities that you see companies missing out on that are not helping to improve their effectiveness and efficiency?
Yes. So a really good example is when we talked about not collecting data for data's sake, we should also not analyze data for analysis sake. So always think about, why are you analyzing the data? What is the reason that you're collecting this data in the first place? Is it because you found this to be a massive risk when you're doing your materiality assessment, or is there something else that has kind of prompted you to collect this data? Another, I would say, not a pitfall, but just, yes, an opportunity miss is not thinking about how the different sets of data that you collect can actually be merged together to create, again, a bigger picture and telling a story of data. So, for example, if you have 4 offices in 4 varied locations, and you collect the water data for it, when you look at this data, you might think, let us focus on Plymouth first. But if you actually look at another source of data that you have collected, for example, looking at baseline water stress in different areas, Plymouth actually has very low water baseline stress. So maybe you won't want to focus on your water reduction initiative in those areas first, but maybe you'll look to areas that do have high baseline water stress and focus there first. So really thinking about why you collected the data, and then also thinking how each data can fit together to fit into your overall strategy and really kind of push you towards sustainability.
Thank you so much. I hope that's got everybody excited about looking into their data now. Thanks, Bianca. So now we move on to the trunk, which is the actual doing. you understand where the significant issues lie. You've got the data at your fingertips, and this stage is about the doing. Here we move from strategy to how to make it happen. And this is how we really achieve transformation for long-term resilience. What we often find is that businesses might have targets, but absolutely no plan in place as to how they're going to achieve them. So this next stage is really incredibly important too. It would be another good time to pause and have a look at these different elements and see how you're really doing. Question yourselves critically about how you're doing on these points at the moment, to make sure that the strategy is actually going to be fulfilling your needs as a business. So key things to think about here are you might have lots of different multiple kind of goals and targets, and bringing them all together and putting them into an implementation plan that is resourced efficiently and that you have responsibilities assigned. Those responsible people need to have the training, they need to know what they're doing, they need to be supported, and it's essential to have progress tracking to keep momentum going and having these feedback loops. And it's really good to make sure that the risks and the opportunities from the materiality and the other pieces of work you've been doing are all incorporated as well. So how do we bring all of this together? Well, a final takeaway for you, and something that we'd really, really like you to consider adopting, is a transition plan. And this is because this is where all of the things we talked about come together and are combined under one umbrella. Doesn't that make you just feel calmer just saying it and thinking about it? And this gives you a coherent, all-encompassing plan, taking all of your implementation plans, all of your goals and targets together to chart a path to a more sustainable future. And it will take you from reactive firefighting in a sustainability silo to a fully embedded, resilient business strategy. And Fern is going to come back and join us again to tell us about a bit more about transition plans. Could you just talk us through, Fern, as you're an absolute expert in this, turning ambition into action, could you talk us through what a transition plan is?
Some of you may not have heard the term transition plan, but you may have heard things like net zero action plan, strategy, implementation plan, all sorts of things like that. And I guess the key here is kind of not what the terms are saying, but what we're talking about when we say transition plan. So like Emma said before, transition plans are just one way to integrate all of those different elements all together, bring them into one place, make sure they're talking to each other, so that your transition to the future, towards sustainability, is a lot smoother and a lot easier. And it's just moving us away from this kind of siloed approach we've been working under, of doing things very, like I said before, like piecemeal. So I mean, put simply, a transition plan can look however you want it to look, depending on your business. That's kind of to be determined by you and how it works best for you. But one thing they must do is clearly communicate your strategy and what you want to achieve, to demonstrate how you're going to achieve the strategy. So one example we use here is a net zero transition plan. So, for example, how you would reduce your emissions, and then also, for example, how you should focus on not just your emissions, but things like your climate-related risks and opportunities. Because obviously, the biggest risk to you isn't just reducing your emissions, it's how do you kind of deal with extreme weather events, how do you deal with kind of political changes that are linked to climate change, for example, legislation, tariffs, things like that. And then finally, will basically enable your business to transition to a future. So it's really moving more towards that kind of long-term thinking, rather than kind of just that short-term, oh, we need to achieve our target next year, how do we do that? It's more thinking about the long-term and taking a step back within that. So transition plans are nothing new, there's no reason, like there's not a coincidence as to why loads of different frameworks are now using transition plans as a kind of suggestion for businesses to do, and that's because basically, regardless of the future and what it looks like, businesses are going to have to be more resilient than they currently are. But also the fact that it's kind of responding to the fact that a lot of businesses have basically been making all of these claims and targets, but not actually doing anything to achieve them. So it's really trying to kind of cut through and say, what are you actually doing? What are you actually not just talking about, but how are you reaping the benefits of what you say you are, basically.
So is that what the main difference is between what we've been doing already, that's kind of meaning we're making the same mistakes and sometimes limited process? Is it really the kind of long-term focus on longer-term transition which sets this apart, this approach?
Absolutely, and it's not just a kind of a transition plan for the next 5 years. It's kind of reaches much further than that. So it's focusing on, like I said before, like long-term resilience, like how will your business look in the future and how do you get there? But the key thing that stands out to me, and the difference between what we've been doing historically, is actually the accountability element. So it's about saying to businesses, you've said you're going to make these things happen, but you haven't. So what have you been doing to get closer towards there? And like I said before, like having a plan isn't just about setting targets. It's actually about kind of making sure that you have the how and the what involved as well, and your people in the business know what they're meant to be doing to contribute towards it. And that's where we kind of see a lot of silos happening in businesses, where people don't really know how they come together to achieve quite a monumental task. So it's that, and it's also the fact that things like budgets have come quite a lot into it. So making sure businesses have the budget behind what they said they're going to do. So what you'll see some businesses do is actually say, we've allocated this budget towards achieving net zero, for example. So yeah, it essentially doesn't matter what terminology you use. It's all to do with those core principles.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Sounds like it's something that can create a real step change. So I hope that's ignited some people's inspiration to move forward with looking at transition planning. Could you, if people are interested, which I'm sure a lot of them are, could you show us what a transition plan actually looks like?
Absolutely. So the example we're using is a climate transition plan, and we'll come on to more kind of what it could look like for other areas in a moment. But this is one example we like from Vodafone, and you can look into it in more detail. We'll send a link to the report, for example, as a reference. But we really like this because this is talking about their scope 3 emissions and how they're going to reduce those emissions. And it breaks it down to different areas. It shows the different time periods. So if you see here, like I talked about before, it's talking about actually the long term, all the way up to 2040, for example, for their targets. And what you can't see behind this is that there's all sorts of different things that they're going to do, breaking it down on a more granular level of what they're going to do. So when you read the report, you have confidence that they actually know what they're doing, which is quite an obvious thing that we perhaps haven't been questioning as much in the past.
And this is an example using net zero, but can they be used for other things as well? Or have you got any examples of how they've been used for other things?
Absolutely. So the concept can be used for all different things, not just net zero, not even just climate. It could be used for kind of social transitions as well, for example. This is one to do with climate, kind of more wider related climate risks and opportunities. So how the business is going to respond to, for example, the physical risks of climate change. So, for example, let's take extreme weather, and they're going to work on their network resilience strategy to work towards that. So the answer is no, it doesn't have to just be focused on net zero and achieving those targets. And it absolutely should be focusing on such a wider range of areas. And particularly when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about environmental, social, and governance, all different areas looping together, which is why we think they're so helpful. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. So now we move. Oh, sorry, carry on.
So we're basically now we're bringing it all together and talking about kind of the branches. So kind of what most people see, or the branches, or the flowers, or the leaves of the trees, basically. And that's kind of what you're sharing with the external world around your sustainability strategy. And like I will say in a moment, this should be a bit that comes easy. This should be the easy part. But what we've seen in the past is that businesses have been really struggling on this part because they haven't got the bits we talked about previously. They can't talk transparently about things because they haven't got the basic foundations behind them. So just going to hand over to Emma, who's our communications expert.
Thanks, Fern. So yes, I'm not going to dwell on this part too much, but we have internal, obviously, and communication. We have communication with stakeholders, who we've already identified who all those stakeholders are, and communication with wider audiences. Lots of different elements to that. But as Fern said, this should be the easier part if you've done all the other steps well. There'll be no surprises. But the main principles that we would like you to think about is that you go back to all of the work that you've put in terms of making sure all your communications are rooted in robust data. The materiality will really help because you can demonstrate that you're focusing on the right issues. You need to communicate with clarity. It's easy to understand. We'd encourage you to communicate your mistakes as well as your successes, because we don't need perfection, by a few people. We need imperfection by lots of people, and only by being honest with what we're struggling with, sharing our problems, sharing, like trying and failing again, will we really achieve success. And I think this honest communication is really appreciated these days. And it really will help like everybody as a community to move in the right direction. Making sure communications are complete and traceable. And this is another thing that's kind of backed up by all of these frameworks lately, that it's not about just picking piecemeal good news stories, but it's about giving the full picture with a bit of honesty, with a good deal of transparency. This is the direction we want to move ahead into. And this really help you to avoid greenwashing at all costs, because there is absolutely no way you can be accused of that. So those are our top tips in that sense. And coming to the end of our whiz through our essential foundations, just to summarize, we have put all of this into a takeaway for you. And with integrating all of these core principles, you can look forwards to innovating and build truly sustainable businesses that are rooted in resilience, which is exactly what the world needs right now. We are offering these sessions for free because we really want your efforts to be successful. We want your businesses to thrive in the long term, but we know many businesses can't do it themselves. And we can support you with all elements of this. We couldn't end without a shameless plug. So we can support you with all elements of these, what we've talked about, but also we've just created this new service, which is called Sustainability Essentials. And what we do is we take you through a light version of everything we've talked about. We do an initial diagnostic, so we tell you how you're kind of measuring up in terms of what you're doing at the moment. And then we work with you to create an action roadmap. And it's about a 6 to 8 week process, and it's very cost effective, very efficient. And so if you're interested, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us about that. And I think that's it. So I think I'm going to hand over for questions and answers in case I've missed anything.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emma. So I'll take the Q&A for you and just ask you a couple of questions. We've had one or two through the Q&A, but we've also got a few that were submitted beforehand. So I'll talk about that in a second. But one of the questions that Kat sort of put there is around which is kind of linked to that point you were just talking about, and I know Fern touched on this as well, but do you need a specialist to help you to do this within an organisation? I think at the point when Kat asked the question, it was at materiality, but I suppose the principle applies to the rest. So we could just get your thoughts about how businesses actually do this, potentially if they want to sort of look at doing it internally.
Do we transfer that one?
Yeah, I mean, I can give my thoughts as well, but I think you go ahead. Yeah.
We had to the end of it. Definitely not. I wouldn't say so. I'd say you can, but it's a lot easier to do it with the consultant or someone else for support. I think with the materiality assessment, the main thing to think about is, because you're thinking about both the impact of the external world on your business and the impact of your business on the external world, you do need to consider a lot of different perspectives. And that's kind of where we've seen the kind of real added value of our support with clients on that, in terms of kind of making sure that it's not just turning into this kind of, this is what we're seeing as a business as a priority. It's more kind of taking a step back and saying, like, what's everyone else? How do we interact with other different stakeholders and the environment, for example? So I'd still say you can do a very simple version of a materiality by just doing what Emma was talking about with like the planetary and social boundaries mapping. which is a really, really good starting point. So even if, for example, you don't have budget at the moment to do a consultant-led materiality project, definitely make a start with that. But also as well, what we're doing with clients is actually, for those that wanted to take more of a hands-on approach, is we have more of a kind of hand-holding approach and empowerment sessions with them to make sure that they are really comfortable kind of doing it, but they've got that kind of expert experience viewpoint feeding in as well. I'm not sure if I missed anything on that one.
No, just to add to that I think just having the external perspective can be helpful to be a bit more challenging in this case as well, that sometimes is needed. Saying that though, if you do and you are going it alone, there's quite a lot of guidance available, especially in the new ESRS standards. So that's definitely worth a look.
And I think, yes, just going to sort of your point, Emma, there around, actually, I suppose it also depends on what you're using it for. Obviously, if you're going to go, if you're doing this kind of process for, and it's got to be externally validated, it's got to go through certain processes, then clearly that's going to be slightly different than if it's just a thing you want to do internally, just get started. So I think, again, it depends on what you're trying to do it for, where you're at already. But I think I'd be right in saying, but correct me if I'm wrong, the process we've talked about today is almost the same process. It's just to what level and to what level of depth. And so it's like, but by following that process, whether you do it internally or with somebody else, you're still building something more robust than if you just kind of do it ad hoc.
Definitely. And one thing we've explored in the past, for example, Emma, like you being like the voice of nature, for example, or like having someone act as the voice of nature is quite a helpful road to go down as well. And
Kat also just asking the questions around the cost for that review. So yeah, the sustainability essentials that Emma talked about, yeah, that's a chargeable service. I think what Emma was referring to was these sessions to just kind of get these started, because we are keen that whether you want to get external advice or do it internally, there is a kind of a process that you can follow to help with that wherever you are. And kind of linked to that, the question I've got here as well is around that process we've talked about here, that kind of end-to-end process. Is that does that apply to all businesses of all sizes and where they are at maturity, or is it kind of for more simple businesses, some parts don't apply? So how does it apply to different businesses, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, that's the amazing thing about it, really, that it seems ridiculously simple, but it does apply to any business. I mean, I've been working with businesses for quite a long time on this, and it's really foundational. It really applies no matter what the size of the business is. Getting these steps right, no matter if you're a small business, large business, multinational business, anything. It just really is the depth of the complexity of the systems that you have to create, and how far reaching you need to look and who you need to involve. But actually the steps are exactly the same, and it's interesting to see now that if you're looking at these standards, such as, like, we work a lot with B Corp, for example, there's also the Future Fit framework. You're looking at legislation nowadays, you're looking at best practice reporting standards. Everything is going through this process, and it's for a reason. And it's because beforehand, everybody was just kind of a bit lost in the dark and going off on different tangents and just kind of doing projects and then communicating that we've planted X number of trees, etc. And the problem is we're just not making the progress that we need to see. And it doesn't mean that the intent is not there, but it just means that it's not been done in the way that really will drive progress in the right direction. So absolutely, whatever business you are, if you follow these steps, you will get the results. And that's what we love about it.
Fabulous. And it kind of answered my other question, last question I've got here, was around the fact that you mentioned a few times that there's quite a lot of frameworks, whether it's legislation, whether it's more voluntary frameworks or like best practice approaches. One of the things we've noticed is quite a lot of the elements we've talked about today, like environmental management system, like materiality, like value chain mapping, they're common across all of these. And I'm guessing that's, and I think you sort of touched on it, is the reason for that is because they are so robust. And therefore, I guess then, is there then a case of, can you almost do it once, so say do a really good quality materiality assessment, but that would then satisfy multiple requirements. Would that be a true statement?
I would say so, but I think you have to realize that doing it really well and really foundationally is really important, but then it's dynamic because things change, legislation changes, things in the world will, what's going on in the world will change, your business will change. So you get the foundational elements, the value chain mapping, the materiality. Once you've done that, you don't, unless your business has changed a lot, you don't need to redo it in a huge sense. But what we don't want to see is these things kind of sitting on a shelf or sitting somewhere and then not kind of being constantly. It needs to be live. All of this needs to be live, and it needs to be kept alive, and grown effectively, because it's there are multiple, like you say, the value chain mapping and things like that go through, carbon accounting, go through materiality, go through. So once you've done it, you then don't have to repeat it, but you kind of just need to keep building on it, and that's a lot. Again, it's all less time and cost effective than not doing it and kind of struggling and not making progress and spending money in the wrong areas and not being efficient. And it goes against, so it's investing that time and maybe a little, the money up front will just reap those benefits for a really long time, as long as you keep the focus on it and tweaking it. But what we've also seen is once business start to see the benefits of doing it properly, it gains this kind of traction and this kind of excitement, and it kind of gains its own momentum as well. You just have to kind of hit that sweet spot with it, and then it gains its own momentum, and then it just kind of builds itself because it becomes so critical to the business and the value is seen. But it's just that kind of, that's putting it all together that can seem a little bit daunting at first.
Fabulous. But I think the key message there is, by doing it well in the beginning, you can serve multiple purposes with that same piece of work, but exactly to your point, but keeping it dynamic. But you don't have to have a materiality for B Corp and a materiality for something else. And it's about doing it once, but doing it right, and then keep it live from there. Fabulous. Sorry, go for it, Ben.
Emma's really hit the nail on the head there around like making it part of business as usual for companies, like it not just being like a sustainability professional who's doing the job, it's like everyone in the business. And I think that's where like the traction really kind of comes from, is making it just a normal part of everyone's everyday role, rather than like a special side task that people do. So thank you, Emma really hit that on the head. Great.
Well, that's us come to the end. I just want to say a huge thank you to Fern, Emma and Bianca for taking us through that today. We will be sharing the slides and everything afterwards, so keep your eyes out for those, but obviously get in touch with the team with any questions anyone's got or want to kind of discuss it further. And so we'll be sharing that in the next day or so. But yeah, huge thank you to you three for taking us through that, and have a good rest of the afternoon, everybody.
And yeah, we just have one more question.
Oh,
stuck in there.
sorry, Kat.
She just asked whether the materiality will be part of the new B Corp standards, so actually B7 standards, and I'm sure it will be, but we've got lots of resources we can pop in the chat or share afterwards, blogs for example, that we can share on those new standards. But yeah, materiality is in there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely shifting to understanding your impact and acting on the most significant impacts, because previously it wasn't there in terms of, you had to understand your impact, but you didn't need to focus as much on those significant material impacts. But it's much more focused, which is what we think it will be, because it's just about to be released. But that makes us very happy, because that's what we want to see, it be more linked to materiality.
Right. I think that is us. Thank you very much all. Thank you, everybody.